Hello and welcome to Forced Movement in Pathfinder 2nd Edition Remastered. Although this video does provide the rules specifically from the Remaster Edition, they should be easy to apply to the Legacy Edition as well. Forced movement occurs whenever a character is moved not by the player controlling them, but by another creature or effect. For example, when one character shoves another or is hurled by a powerful gust of wind. A few common sources of forced movement include the shove and reposition actions. Shove is an application of the athletic skill, costs one action, and requires you to have at least one hand free. You roll your athletic skill versus your target's fortitude DC, and on a success, your target moves back 5 feet, and on a critical success, your target moves back 10 feet. In either case, you can choose to follow after them, as might occur when bull rushing someone. On a failure, nothing happens, and on a critical failure, you fall prone. And note that shove does have the attack trait, so it both contributes to and is affected by the multiple attack penalty. So for example, Ombi is fighting a horned devil and wishes to push him away. He would roll his athletic skill of plus 13 and compare that total against the devil's fortitude DC. To calculate the devil's fortitude DC, we take their fortitude save bonus of plus 15 and add 10 for a total fortitude DC of 25. Ombi rolls a 14 on the die plus their athletics bonus of plus 13 for a total of 27. This is a success, and the devil is pushed back 5 feet or 1 square. And note that if Ombi made a strike with their first action and then attempted this shove with their second action, they would have failed because this check would be subject to a -5 multiple attack penalty, lowering it to only 22. The second common source of forced movement is the reposition action. This is also an application of the athletic skill, but is used to move an enemy into a space that is not away from you. This works almost the same way as shoving someone, except you don't need a free hand if you already have that target grabbed or restrained. The target must remain within your reach throughout the entire movement, and if you critically fail, your target gets to move you as if they had performed a reposition action. So for example, say Ombi and Quinn the Rogue are fighting this same devil. Ombi may decide he wants to grab hold of the devil and move him one space to the right to apply flanking, so that Quinn can get all of the benefits of the devil being off guard on his turn. This wouldn't be a shove action because the devil is not being moved away from Ombi. He's currently 5 feet away and will still be 5 feet away at the end of the reposition, therefore he's not being moved away. Ombi would roll his athletic skill versus the devil's fortitude DC just as before, but the major difference here is if he critically fails, the devil can instead move him into another space. Special rules apply when forced movement occurs in the game. First, the speed and distance the creature is moved is determined by the effect that causes the forced movement. For example, the text for the hydraulic push spell says on a success the target is pushed by 5 feet, and on a critical success the target is pushed back 10 feet. This is an example of forced movement, and the distance the target is moved away from the caster is listed in the description and has nothing to do with the target's own speed score. Next, be aware that forced movement does not trigger reactions that are normally triggered by movement. For example, say you're a fighter and you're wielding a club with critical specialization. You roll a critical hit against a bugbear and knock him back 10 feet. At this point, you might also want to spend your reaction to perform a reactive strike, which was previously called an attack of opportunity, because an enemy that was previously within your reach just moved out of its square. However, you would not be able to do so in this case for 2 reasons. First, because this is a forced movement which does not trigger reactions due to movement, and second, because the text for reactive strike specifically states that the target must spend their own action to move, which does not occur due to a forced movement. The path that the target of forced movement takes is determined by the creature or effect that caused the forced movement. 2nd edition does not enforce a lot of hard rules for determining this and mostly leaves it in the hands of the GM to make a final decision on if the path makes sense or not. Most causes of forced movement state that the target is either knocked back or pulled towards. In these cases, knocking back should be a fairly straight line away, and pulling towards should be a fairly straight line towards the source of the effect. And also note that difficult terrain and other hindrances to movement do apply to forced movement just as they do to normal movement. And if the path of forced movement would move a creature into a space they cannot occupy, for example because there is a wall or other object there, they would stop moving in the last valid square that they can occupy. This can sometimes raise the question of what happens when you shove one enemy into another. The rules say that no two creatures can occupy the same space. Therefore, when you try to shove one creature into another, the shoved creature would stop moving in the last valid space of the path and not enter into or interact with the other creature or its space. Also, the rules for moving through an allied creature's space would not apply here because the rule for forced movement says movement ends if the space cannot be occupied, and one creature cannot occupy another creature's space. However, the GM makes the final decision as to what happens when one creature is shoved into another, and in a lot of cases, I would rule differently in my game than what the official rule says, and declare that the second creature needs to make a save to avoid being knocked prone, simply because that sounds more fun to me than just having the shoved creature stop in the last valid space. But from a rules perspective, be aware that the shoved creature would likely stop before interacting with the second creature. The rules also provide guidance for what happens when forced movement moves a creature into a dangerous space, like shoving a creature into a pit or into a wall of fire. The rules state that when a creature is pushed or pulled, they may be moved into a dangerous space, but not when they are repositioned in some other manner. So if you were to shove an enemy off a ledge, they would immediately start falling and be allowed to spin their reaction on grab and edge. And if you shoved an enemy into a wall of fire, they would suffer immediate damage for crossing into it, and more damage at the start of their turn, assuming they are still occupying that space. And some abilities allow a creature to pick up and carry another with it. This is also forced movement, but unlike with pushing or pulling someone, you cannot move a carried creature through a hazardous space that you too do not also pass through. For example, some types of animated constructs have the ability to pick up and carry a target with them. If they did so, both the construct and the carried creature would be considered as occupying the same space for the duration of that movement. The construct couldn't walk one path while holding the carried creature in an adjacent space so that they are harmed by an environmental hazard that the construct is able to avoid. Likewise, forced movement that does not involve a push or a pull could not be used to move an enemy into a dangerous space. For example, you cannot use Reposition to move an enemy over the ledge of a cliff. But remember, in all cases, the GM has the final say as to what is or is not possible with forced movement. That should do it for our discussion on forced movement in Pathfinder. If you have any questions or insights, please leave them in the comments. And I would like to take a brief moment to thank everyone who supports this channel, whether that be by leaving comments, clicking the like button, subscribing to the channel, subscribing to the Patreon, or buying a super thanks. I greatly appreciate all you do to support me. With that, thanks for watching, take care, and happy gaming.